Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. It's been a really fascinating week for a couple of different reasons. The main one for me, though, is I almost watched a commented video with the most interesting feedback was actually a podcast version of one of the videos, which is cool, that's what it's there for, but it was from a whole bunch of Musk-loving dude bro chuds who felt like anybody or any organization who chose to walk away from Twitter because it's a vile, toxic environment, which they proved with their actions, well, they apparently were horrible people for not allowing themselves to stand around and continue being abused. It's a very strange logic, I don't understand it, but apparently the sort of people who think that Elon Musk's actions at the inauguration were just a heartfelt lovin' more than, a horrifying Nazi salute, well, they get all upset when people won't stand around and continue to be abused by them. Weird. Anyway, the other thing that I found really fascinating this week was an email that I got at the beginning of the week from somebody who didn't realize that there's a difference between reply and reply all. And they accidentally sent me an 18-page manifesto on how a number of the freedom community are hoping to take over local body elections this year. A full-on manifesto with plans, ideas, and suggestions on how to do it, written by everybody's favourite Hamilton City Councillor, who is a complete arse, Andrew Bidder. Yeah, you can actually read about that now in this week's newsletter. It's linked in the community tab at the moment. I think right now you should be able to access it from the community tab, or 11 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember when I scheduled it for. Anyway, check out this week's Omnibus edition, and I will talk to you at the other end. Hello there, kia ora. What a weekend! On Friday, the government tried to hide its latest changes to the Waitangi Tribunal with what's known as a Friday dump, releasing really shitty, unpopular news where it gets buried on a Friday afternoon. About the time that taxpayer union poll came out, actually. Anyway, the news this week was that 10 members of the Waitangi Tribunal, some of the most learned academics and experts in tikanga, were being replaced with some questionable choices, like right-wing blogger Philip Crump, whose works include, Stories for News Talk ZB gloating about the anti-trans conference that was being put on by the Tamakis not being cancelled by council, platforming that Hobson's pledge-loving real estate agent who refused to undertake mandatory industry training on Te Tiriti, a heap of anti-mandate stuff, and quite a bit on Golriz. Oh, and they also added to the tribunal a Manawatu councillor who uses opinion polls run by Stuff and interviews with Liz Gunn as evidence he bases his perspectives and decisions on. Yeah. Oh, and then Sunday, the Prime Minister announced a cabinet reshuffle. A reshuffle before the start of the political year actually isn't that unusual. Most Prime Ministers do it until, Luxon, really. When he got in, he said he would only reshuffle when he felt it was needed. So why is it needed now? Well, last week's TPU Curia poll, the polling company of choice actually for right-wing parties despite not being governed by the rules of political polling regulation, said that the popularity of the party is tanking. But even worse, almost 60% of people polled thought the country was going in the wrong direction. That's a bit of a jump on previous polls. So, in a totally not desperate seeming move, the Prime Minister reshuffled his Titanic deck chairs. Sorry, his cabinet chairs. Gone is Dr. Shane Reti from Health. An actual doctor who may have been ineffective and actually causing harm in the role, but at least he's a doctor. His replacement, the dimmest simian in Parliament. Our health portfolio is now being run by an evangelical Christian who doesn't believe women should have the right to choose what they do with their body, so much so that he ran an anti-abortion club at uni and voted against abortion reform and liked tweets that celebrated the removal of Roe versus Wade in the US. And he's against cancelling the cruel and scientifically proven ineffective practice of conversion therapy. He has trouble reading bilingual signs, and when he held the portfolio for transport was often called out for his complete arrogance at the way he ignored expert advice about the increase in road deaths and injuries his policies would cause. As local government minister, his choices were driven by political ideology, with local government members asking publicly if he even knew what local government did, as he was so clearly out of touch in making decisions that ignored reality and expert advice. He has been put in a role that will see further cuts to one of our most important public sector cornerstones and has no remorse already for his actions, which is sure to be a great thing for the future of the country's health sector. Taking over local government from Simeon, well, that's Simon Watts, the North Shore MP who refuses to join us for the show that we do on Friday nights because apparently my shirts are too loud. As Environment Minister, Watts has delivered us the first rise in emissions output in a decade and set out policies which mean that we're no longer on target to reach emission targets for our international trade obligations by 2050. As Lester Levy's number 2 when he ran the DHB that ended up leaving Middlemore with black mould on the walls, he's now in charge of local government in a local government election year. Oh, that's going to end so well. Oh, and to make sure that the South Island stop saying that the National Party are ignoring them by cutting funding to the Dunedin Hospital, threatening funding to other hospitals, telling the Grey District Council that they had to build their own non-black mould-filled police station, crippled their local councils with some of the biggest water infrastructure costs being returned to them, and cutting them off with, the ferry cancellations. Rangitata MP James Meagher has been given the MP for the South Island role. There's other changes as well, like Melissa Lee totally out of a position in or out of cabinet. But here's the problem for the Prime Minister and National. They can't reshuffle their coalition partners, but the actions of their partners, a tobacco lobby-loving Associate Health Minister, a childless Associate Education Minister who Snapchats teenagers, a gun-mad Minister for Firearms, the Minister for Mining whose party rhetoric around race led to his own brother being abused by a racist piece of shit spouting the lines New Zealand First members scream online. The thing that makes it feel like this country isn't going in the right direction, well, a large chunk of them are being caused by the parties the Prime Minister has no control over because he's a weak leader, flailing around hoping no one notices how poorly things are going. But, if we put this deck chair over there, at least you'll get a lovely view of the iceberg. Hello there, kia ora. There's been a bit of a silent revolution happening within our media sphere, and it's pissing off a bunch of racist, sexist, homophobic, shitty, impotent people. And the reasons you probably haven't noticed this revolution is because it's actually being done with no fanfare behind the scenes by a chunk of our major mainstream news outlets. What they're doing is walking away from Elon's toxic circle jerk platform Twitter, or X. Since Musk, seen here at the inauguration of Donald Trump giving a Nazi salute, took control of the platform, well, there's been a subsequent rise in hate and disinformation on there under the guise of free speech. The toxicity levels there have increased exponentially. As a result of this, TVNZ has now walked away from the platform, changing their profiles to point out that they're no longer updated or monitored. TVNZ joined Stuff and its stable of mastheads and the ODT as mainstream media outlets who have chosen to walk away, while the spin-offs limited its interactions on the platform after a rise in vile behaviours, particularly towards minority groups. And we know that behaviour is increasing because of the mountain of research that's been done showing this, which indicates that Facebook, with the removal of US fact-checkers, is likely to descend into the sort of place where you'll find that kind of hateful toxicity becoming much more prominent. As of today, there are 3 mainstream media outlets still posting regularly on Twitter or X. The Herald, News Talk ZB, and The Newsroom. And when you see the quality of the commentary that they get, well, you can kind of see why others have felt the need to move away and why a lot of people avoid interacting with these outlets online. Twitter was, in the past, a common source of journalism for leads, for being able to reach out and connect to people. But with the creation of a space where people feel unsafe, they choose to leave because there's nothing keeping them there. And with it goes important ways to keep people informed, including people in the media. Of course, this has upset those people who feel it's their right to have access to mainstream media to scream and harass those who work in the field. But they're actually a bigger problem than a lot of people realize. You see, content moderation is an important tool for mainstream media to be able to show that they understand the power of messaging and impact that they could have, and the reach that they've got as well. It allows for safe conversations where people can disagree and debate without denigration or fear of retribution. And by allowing people who say things like, this about immigrants, for example, to use your platform to spread their messaging, it causes audiences to switch off and the trust level drops in the work that they do. If a response feed is just filled with hateful bigotry, that colours the opinions and actions of people just wanting to access information, which is the majority of users. Then it suffers from what media theorists call the nasty effect. This is when people turn off and lose respect for a media organization based on the level of trust and safety that the social media audience has about interacting with the content. It leads to echo chambers in comments, which leads to media changing its content to match the needs of those who go out of their way to comment to build interaction levels, which are sold to advertisers, which means a shift in ideological perspective, which means those getting information from mainstream media and their view on the world shifting as well. And while the alt-right here will be complaining that it's a short-sighted move to leave what is obviously such a big and important platform with so many people, international research shows that mainstream news outlets leaving Twitter overseas have seen a negligible drop in traffic to their websites and greater trust levels in their content. Interestingly, research here shows leaving social media had a negligible impact initially on trust levels for Stuff, which were the first mainstream media outlet to leave Facebook in 2020, with only a brief return for essential updates around things like the death of Queen Elizabeth or Cyclone Gabriel. But their introduction of paywalled content coincided with their biggest drop in trust levels according to AUT data on media trust. There's a lot wrong with the way that the general public think about and understand mainstream media, mixing up concepts like accuracy and bias, for example. But if we want to see if the decision to stop allowing the most toxic, nasty asshats on the internet to hijack their platform is a good one, then you just need to see their reaction to no longer being able to do that. Free speech rights don't mean anyone has to platform speech that they disagree with or that puts people in a position where they might feel vulnerable or at risk. But the people who feel that they're entitled to do that, they're the ones upset at this move, which shows that maybe it's the right thing to do. Hello there, kia ora. The December quarter consumer price index data is out and it's official. Inflation hasn't changed since September. And of course, that's reason to celebrate for this government who wants to once again take credit for things in all the wrong ways. Inflation saw rises in the costs on international travel, second-hand cars, and rent, with prices coming in lower for fruit and vegetables, a seasonal change, which isn't caused by the government. Although their attitude to climate change, that may mean warmer seasons for us all, so I guess cheaper vegetables in the future? Rents themselves are actually up 4.2% in the December quarter, and rates payments were up 12.2% for the same period. And the driver for that? Increased costs put onto councils by central government. I'm not the one saying that. Brian Cadigan, Mayor of Clutha District, a very, very national loving part of the country, was very clear when he said that the massive costs being felt by ratepayers was because of the way the national-led government had approached water infrastructure, demanding a return of costs to council books without a plan going forward after the last election. In Auckland, that was exacerbated by the removal of the regional fuel tax, which offset transport infrastructure costs to the tune of billions. That then had to be found by the council, while the government continued to refuse to give councils the tools to offset costs by allowing them new revenue streams. Now, it should be pointed out, in the interest of fairness, that StatsNZ have used the data on rental prices based on data sets from MBIE in October and November only, as there's a system upgrade going on in December to the bond lodgement system that they use for tracking rent prices, which means that the December data was delayed. So that's going to be incorporated into the next round. But that also means that that increase is based only on 2/3 of the information, which means that the increase is likely to either be constant or go up when that final data set gets put in. But it should also be noted that the same data sets show rent went up 6.9% under this current government in its first year in power, which is higher than any rent increases seen under the last government. In fact, it's the highest rent increase seen since 2003. But the cumulative impact of rental percentage increases means that the actual dollar value was higher for this last increase than the similar percentage value increase a few years ago. The change in second-hand car prices is also a really fascinating one. Changes in demand have stemmed from policy changes around electric vehicles. That clean car discount scheme that offered rebates on eligible vehicles, it included second-hand vehicles. But the cancellation of that by the current government has seen a shift in public demand for petrol vehicles, especially smaller cars with more efficient fuel usage. But the ute tax was bad, according to Groundswell, so it had to go. And they're clearly the experts who trust science. One of the areas as well where costs have decreased, though, is what we call domestic accommodation, which helps keep inflation down when it all balances out. These are the costs for hotels, motels, Airbnbs that are used by people traveling around the country. This has actually seen a 9% drop because our tourism market is down on expectations. Our dollar is so weak and it's not likely to get better while we're in the worst recession since the 90s, and New Zealanders don't have the funds to travel as much as the cost of living still really high, and times are pretty tough economically, where record levels of unemployment and economic uncertainty make it less likely for people to travel domestically. So I guess the government could take credit for that if they really wanted to. So, how will the government make sure that inflation keeps going down, that our economy keeps growing? After all, we were promised downward pressure on rents and a laser focus on the costs of living. That's clearly happened. And this week, the Prime Minister has been promising economic growth as their priority this year. And he clearly has a great track record on these promises. Well, apparently, it's going to be through science and data led decision making and growth, because their support for small to medium-sized businesses last year netted these results. Well, the results in that field are really clear, with record business liquidations and closures and credit defaults for businesses up 16%. But I'm sure that science and tech focus is going to pan out brilliantly. It's not like the government would do something ridiculous like slash funding to the science and R&D areas around the country that they expect to rely on for this, while making sure that they listen to experts to guide their decisions instead of, their clearly based ideological choices that they make that they know are unpopular, like putting a Christian evangelical in charge of the health sector, where the Prime Minister has said he'd have to step in and stop the minister changing abortion laws in a situation that shouldn't even be a consideration to begin with. So, of course, we can totally trust them to keep looking after the economy with their laser focuses and to have a plan going forward that relies on science and data, because their track record quite clearly states that that's something they're really going to be great at. So there, kia ora. There's always a reason to say no, but if we keep saying no, we'll keep going nowhere. This is the inspirational line from the State of the Nation speech that the Prime Minister gave yesterday in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. And you know what? The Prime Minister is right. If we keep saying no, then we'll go nowhere. We need to say yes, like the 72,900 Kiwis who said yes to leaving the country last year, making it the largest year ever for people moving out of the country because of the results that this government has wrought upon us all. Well, since the Prime Minister is clearly one for saying yes all the time, like he's in a 2008 Jim Carrey movie co-starring Rhys Darby, well, I thought I would check to see if I could find any examples, no matter how rare they are, of him saying no, because it's always good to remember these things. Like when he was asked by abuse and state care survivors not to restart boot camps and to make sure that there was support in place through organisations like Oranga Tamariki to help young people, and to look at evidence-based results of Section 7AA in the OT Act, which saw amazing results in dropping the numbers of uplifted young Māori. That's right, he said no to that. Or like when he was asked if he thought it was wrong for him as a wealthy and sorted Prime Minister to get an accommodation supplement when he refused to live in Premier House. No, that's right, he said no, he was entitled. Or when his government was asked to help with the Dunedin flood mitigation plan just before the city was flooded last year. Or any science-based approach to climate change at all, really. Or how he was asked whether or not he thought Māori had never ceded sovereignty. He said no, that was not an issue. They obviously ceded sovereignty. Or he got asked if he felt our delegations on past trips were any good. He said no and called them C-listers. Can Dunedin have a hospital? The hospital that they were promised by this government before the election. Or even proper advice from actual experts in law changes around heated tobacco instead of whatever the minister Googled. Still no? Well, speaking of law, how about equitable access to legal tools like cultural background reports for everyone, not just the rich? Okay, how about a tax cut that doesn't disproportionately benefit the wealthy, tobacco companies, and landlords? Well, what about custom built rail enabled ferries designed to handle our unique conditions and requirements? What about allowing work from home for government workers? A practice that's shown to increase worker satisfaction and productivity? Maybe even just an acknowledgement that firing 10,000 civil servants would disproportionately impact Wellington Central in a negative way because there's suddenly a whole bunch of people not working there? How about staffing levels in our health sector that don't exhaust those already there, that don't force frontline staff to be doing backroom work, pulling them from frontline work, and don't put us all at risk through systemic pressure put on the entire health sector? What about an evidence based approach to provision of primary health care and medications, which lead to less demand on hospital and emergency services by providing adequate funding and costs being covered? Or even those cancer drugs that you promised without taking money from next year's budget because you forgot to budget for them this year? How about a Prime Minister actually accountable to the press, one who's willing to front up to the media? What about actual evidence used to make decisions? Can we have that instead of the mythical 14 layers of management, which included those visiting a hospital because they were sick? Maybe we can have strong support for small to medium-sized businesses so they stop going under at the record rates that they've been going under. What about scientifically based, evidence-led approaches to transport safety and management? Now that we've got a new transport minister, is it possible that we might get that? I mean, that's not a no. To be fair, that's a maybe, but so far it's been a no. Maybe we could have some honesty in the reporting of debt levels with our tertiary institutions. Or would that ruin the surprise shake-up that they've been promised later this year? How about some respect for the disabled community? An iota of it. Is that possible? How about a Waitangi Tribunal, Human Rights Commissioner, Race Relations Commissioner appointment that doesn't look like the worst possible choices? Can we try that? Can we keep the first home grants that you promised people while you were in opposition? Can we treat those on a benefit with any sort of dignity, understanding that this is a safety net and not vilify those getting benefits or within that system? How about a rebuilt education system based on actual data and research and not racist seeming vibes or conspiracy fueled ramblings from New Zealand First? Can we let councils make their own decisions? How about funding for our creative sector and keeping the incoming Deputy Prime Minister from throwing his weight around and threatening people and organisations if they publish things that he doesn't like? What about meeting the pay requests of the police or the nurses or the teachers? Or a new police station in Greymouth? What about an actual plan for water infrastructure instead of winging it and hoping maybe some basic attempt at being a good treaty partner? Keeping benefits indexed to the way that they were so that future benefit increases aren't so small they're impossible to survive and end up having beneficiaries getting less than they would have under the old system. What about funding for proper mental health services or even the suicide prevention office? Maybe even something that outlaws the use of Nazi signs and insignia. How about a minimum wage increase that's actually higher than the rate of inflation so that those that are earning minimum wage aren't essentially getting paid less than they were before? What about a plan to get people to stop smoking? Or an approach to trans people in amateur sport that's industry-led, evidence-based, and not being pushed by the conspiracy-fueled fringe nut jobs that are controlling New Zealand First? Oh, it was no to all of those, but a quick yes to anything his coalition partners ask for, no matter how divisive, racist, hateful, or stupid it is, and a very quick yes to tax breaks for landlords. If the Prime Minister wants us to be a country that focuses on growth and stop saying no, then maybe he should take it on board for himself. Instead, he's led the country into a regressive state where people are leaving in droves because they can't see a future here for themselves or their whānau. He wants a country that grows in the future, then build one where people want to be here, where they can see the benefit of being here, of investing in this place with their ideas, their time, their creativity, business plans, knowing the place is going to look after them when they need help, when they're sick, when they want to learn, when they want to care for their home, when they want to look out for each other and celebrate who they are. Or, we could just have more big concerts at Eden Park, because Clearly, that'll fix everything. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's The News. Political parties all over the motu have been getting out to tell us what state the nation is in this week, with the two Chris's delivering speeches, the incoming Deputy Prime Minister trying to sell us on selling us to privatisation, and the current Deputy Prime Minister in the baking aisle of Woolworths looking for tinfoil to make a hat based on a lovely design that Tanya Unkovic sent him. The start of the year often sees speeches like these from political figures as they lay out their agenda for the year ahead. Add into the mix the local body elections in October and you've already gone to sleep. I'm sorry, please wake up. I'll keep making fun of politicians if that helps. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here eyeing up the unflavoured chicken drumsticks being served across the room, gave his annual State of the Nation speech at the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, a fitting location since these are the only people who say confidence is up with the government in their regular business vibe survey. In his speech, Luxon spoke about focusing on economic growth, something he hoped meant that Nicola Willis would finally be able to afford Ben & Jerry's when she went to the movies. He chastised Auckland Council when he claimed more concerts at Eden Park would help with this, ignoring the fact that when Eden Park asked Auckland Council for 6 concerts a year, Auckland Council said yes. And when they asked for 12 a year, the council also said yes. But somehow it is still all the council's fault. He promised a growth in tourism numbers, which he expects to increase when any of the record 72,900 people who moved away from the country permanently last year come back to visit whānau. Meanwhile, in Palmerston North, Labour leader Chris Hipkins, seen here showing you how to dance the hokey pokey, spoke to his caucus about the need to focus on what media are calling areas traditionally the stronghold of National: crime and economics. While the party didn't reveal any concrete policy, it's expected to have more substance than gang patch is bad but swastikas meh. Ram raids are coming to eat your babies, and it's okay if the Prime Minister financially benefits from moving the Bright Line test as long as we don't have capital gains tax, used by the current government as slogans during the last election. David Seymour, seen here trying to force choke anyone who doesn't believe 8% is a big number, has announced he intends to do something that the Prime Minister won't, and go to Waitangi this year, despite warnings from his hapu to avoid the ceremonies in the wake of his Treaty Principles Bill. Said Seymour, "It's okay, they'll all be speaking in Te Reo, so I won't know what's happening. But if anyone yells at me, my supporters are going to blow that completely out of proportion and vilify all Māori for it." Speaking of David Seymour, seen here attending Diwali, a deeply religious festival that originated in India, where he was the only party leader not in attendance at Ratana Pā today, which he has often avoided, citing its religious aspects, instead choosing to use the day to give his State of the Nation speech pushing for more privatisation in a speech that ACT sponsors are calling something I can't say here because this is a family-friendly show, but they have a hell of a sticky mess to clean up. An event so clearly important, almost every other politician in the country was elsewhere paying attention to something else. Seymour, the leader of one of the 3 coalition parties which currently governs, that set a record in business liquidation numbers, some of the fastest rising unemployment numbers on record, the biggest jump in beneficiaries and homelessness seen in a generation, the highest ever number of people leaving the country to relocate overseas ever, and the worst recession since the 90s, framed his speech as a counter to the steady decline the country is in by offering something he described as bold action. And because our media are clearly woke leftist shills, they all streamed his speech uninterrupted without criticism or critique, because 8% of the vote somehow warrants 100% of media platforming your message uncritically. In a bizarre move straight out of Season 2 of the hit comedy series The Good Place, Māori Affairs Minister Tama Potaka was seen doing push-ups in front of media at National's year-starting caucus in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. He claims it's about keeping fit, and nothing to do with not wanting to answer questions about why a right-wing blogger being praised by the same people who consider this action from Elon Musk as a sign of love, and a Manawatu councillor who uses Liz Gunn as a journalistic source to base his policies around, had been put on the Waitangi Tribunal. Media company NZME, owners of the hits ZM Radio Hauraki, Flavour, Coast, Gold, News Talk ZB, Business Desk and The Herald, have announced plans driven by falling revenue to cull nearly 40 jobs from within the organisation and to refocus content on output that engages with audiences. So, expect more clickbait and thinly veiled racism while they retain their highest paid stirrers whose media illiterate audience can't tell the difference between their opinion and actual news. In the United States, President Donald Trump, seen here bringing back masculine energy, was the first convicted felon to be sworn in as president at his second swearing-in ceremony. During his rambling speech, he made a false claim about the atom being split in America. While this is blatantly false and easily debunked, media here seem to focus more on that than on the concerning use of a Nazi salute by the richest man in the world, which RNZ described as an odd gesture. Within hours of signing multiple executive orders, states had already begun to sue the administration for breaching the Constitution. He had pardoned or commuted 1,600 people involved in the January 6 insurrection. He had ordered the government to call his friend Caitlyn Jenner Bruce from now on, removed Spanish-language versions of government websites, and fired 1,000 government workers for not being loyal enough. But he took credit for the work of the New Zealanders, so we need to focus on that. And finally, Parapara Umu Beach was lit up by the warming glow of waves full of bioluminescent creatures, creating stunning blue waves. NIWA researchers have said that the organisms causing this are most likely plankton, and spotting an orange bloom of algae off the coast in daylight is a good indicator of a nighttime light show. They expected a few more days of shows like this to continue under current conditions, which are rare for the area this far south down the island, and are probably related to warming water temperatures caused by climate change, said Climate Change Minister Simon Watts. See, by pretending we're doing something about climate change, we're clearly making beautiful things like this possible. And that is this week's The News. Hey, cheers for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. I want to thank all of you guys for watching it, supporting it, and especially our members who have joined. The support really helps make sure that we can get things done. The membership fees last month actually paid the internet bill, which is always a very good thing to have when you want to stream stuff online. So I certainly appreciate it. It really does make things a hell of a lot easier. And if you want to become a member, you can do that down below. There's like a thing that says membership. I don't know. It's been a long day. I'm exhausted. I'm going to go have a bit of a lie down. No, I'm not. I'm going to go to Hobsonville and do some work, depending on the weather. Anyway, ka kite anō, live long, prosper, be one with the force. I'll catch you guys all next time.
Is it secret? Is it safe?